Hi everyone, my name is Jim Jakiko, and welcome to my Module 2 presentation for COM 370. In this report, we are going to look at the theoretical underpinnings of corporate social responsibility. Our objectives for this presentation are the following. First, we want to describe the four theoretical models of CSR. Second, we want to examine the strengths and weaknesses of each model. And third, we want to explore drivers behind the adoption of each model. So first up, we have the classical model, which is also known as the instrumentalist model. So under this model, corporations view wealth creation as the primary and only responsibility to society. This is often operationalized as a commitment to preserving and increasing shareholder value. In a way, by creating economic benefits for the business, its owners, its managers, and its workers, those benefits ripple out to the wider community by way of the invisible hand. For simplicity, and so as not to bridle business activities with unnecessary considerations, this model relies on the legal framework as the company's sole ethical obligation. Additionally, this model is the most purest of the four in terms of adherence to economic theory. It prioritizes an efficient economic system and therefore considers non-economic activities as business inefficiencies, such as social investments. It also holds that institutional responsibility ends at wealth creation and reinforces a separation of duties between government and enterprise. In this philosophy, companies are supposed to create wealth and stimulate economic activity, and the government then distributes that wealth for the benefit of the collective. So what does this look like in the real world? The thrust of the classical model is that the mere existence of the business and the economic activity that it generates is enough social intervention to satisfy the needs of the community and the general public. It does not view additional social investments as a requirement to achieve corporate citizenship. It does so by creating jobs, generating wealth for employees and communities, and through taxation, those benefits are spread more widely with the help of the government. However, a company may decide to engage in CSR activities if they prove to be good business cases. For example, cause marketing uses the creation of social benefits to market a corporation's products, thereby creating a self-interested win-win situation for the business and the community. There are certain benefits to this economically driven model. Shareholders make the greatest ROI, prices stay low, benefiting customers, corporate efficiency allows for expansion, job creation, and wage and benefit increases, and finally, higher wages result in higher taxes for the government to use in social programs. Having said that, there are very glaring weaknesses to this model. First, human elements in the economic system are not viewed as such. Everything is transactional, and all benefits are only measured through an economic standard. CSR is viewed as a profit-generating activity, otherwise it is a business inefficiency. It discounts benefits that may exist in other domains that may not be measured by purely economic indicators, such as better morale and goodwill toward the company. It also relies heavily on the concept of the invisible hand, in that it assumes the ideal of market equilibrium as status quo, rather than something that market actors are always working toward. It assumes that a dollar saved by the company is a dollar saved by all of its stakeholders, which is often not the case. Also, the priority here is maximizing shareholder value, and all other considerations come after. This means that if management is split between taking care of its owners versus its employees, or the community in which it operates, it will always take the side of shareholders. And finally, legality is a very low bar for it to be the sole ethical obligation of any corporation. Legal and moral rarely overlap, and the moral standard is set to be the bare minimum in this model. Corporations also often use legal loopholes to conduct morally gray business activities. Additionally, it opens up communities to risk as technology advances and no legislation exists to protect them from unfair business practices. Next, we have the stakeholder model, also known as the political model. Here, we start to acknowledge corporations as not separate from the community, but instead critical participants in the local and national economy with certain rights and responsibilities as citizens of their own. In this model, CSR is driven by interests of stakeholders such as workers, stockholders, and communities. It emphasizes the power of the corporation and thereby assigns a commensurate amount of responsibility based on the influence that they wield. It also extends the corporate responsibility to the political domain. Finally, this is a much more complex and expanded model, which considers more factors beyond profit and staying within the confines of the law. So, what are the strengths of this model? Proponents suggest that a stakeholder model can lead to superior long-term performance for specific firms and society in general. Stakeholders such as workers and communities are valued above mere profit as well. Unlike the classical model, it is not owners come first in the stakeholder approach, which empowers other direct participants in the corporation who help it thrive. Proponents also suggest an improved resilience from external threats and attacks. Finally, human rights are upheld as a deontological imperative, meaning that the well-being of the people who participate in the business, whether employees or the immediate communities, are guarded by ethical frameworks that distinguish right from wrong. Corporate actions are assessed based on their intrinsic value within the ethical framework, rather than their consequences. In terms of weaknesses, while those who argue for the stakeholder model say there is potential for a profit incentive, it does not necessarily guarantee long-term profitability. It needs to be executed well enough to generate sustainable goodwill for the business for it to move the needle in a measurably positive way. Having multiple stakeholders influence the corporation's decisions inherently means a risk of conflict among those voices. Different participants, whether owner, worker, or customer, will have their specific interests that they would want to lobby, and this might lead to a decision-making stalemate, or one side being given preference over another. One way to solve this is to have a solid and transparent decision-making framework where priorities are set and followed in terms of whose interests matter the most to the sustainability of the business. Once these guidelines are set, they need to be upheld by management in order to maintain its identity to its stakeholders. The third CSR model that we're looking at is the social demandingness model. Also known as the integrative theories model, social demandingness asserts that business depends on society for its existence and growth. This model introduces the concept of mutual benefit between society and enterprise, and both are responsible for each other's continued survival. Management is expected to consider the expectations of its stakeholders, including the general public. In this model, corporations are viewed as common property. The public is often held responsible for bailing out businesses during tough times, but it is their prerogative with the help of the government whether to bail them out or not. This responsibility is assumed based on whether or not the business had been equally accountable to the people in its operation. Here we have the idea of corporate legitimacy as a function of their ability to provide social benefits. So, what are some of the strengths of this model? First, this perspective establishes fairness through mutual accountability. If the classical model is viewed as transactional in the economic sense, social demandingness is equally so, but encompasses many more areas than pure numbers, such as the well-being of stakeholders, communities, and the general public. This model also gives the power to the public in determining which corporations flourish. While a perfect economic market promises the same, this extends the power of the people in the decision of giving aid to businesses that the market has failed. Additionally, this model emphasizes the concept of social costs and benefits of business as an integral aspect of running an enterprise that serves the public. As for weaknesses, under the social demandingness model, there is confusion around the concept of the public, especially in multinational organizations that operate in different territories. Questions around which public the corporation is accountable to become more complicated when an American company establishes manufacturing and other operations in another market. Who should they feel they have responsibility to? Americans, the foreign territories, or both? There is also a lack of clarity of the scope of social benefits that business is responsible for. Where does that scope end and that of the government begin? If left to its own devices, this model could create an uneven split of accountabilities between government and enterprise, especially in instances where corporations end up having to step in for the failures of the government and vice versa. Finally, this introduces the risk of heavy-handed regulation by the government, where it begins to mandate certain social responsibilities that might not typically be expected of corporations. Our fourth theoretical model for CSR is social activism. Also known as the ethical model, social activism asserts that corporations have responsibility to society, and these responsibilities are determined through a normative universal framework of ethics. In this model, corporate executives are not just viewed as business leaders and titans of industry, but also as social and moral leaders. Because this model imposes a normative ethical framework, meaning what is considered good or bad behavior is clearly defined, it relies less on cultural context, where relative morality might use different standards for value judgments. It is less context-specific, at least, than the integrative model, where responsibilities are expected but not clearly assigned, and some overlaps may exist between government and enterprise. This means that the universal framework can be easily exported and implemented in the case of multinational organizations, but also across different regions in the same country through the business sector. This model also introduces an equal standard of responsibility for leaders from different sectors, public or private. Business executives are equally accountable to the public as bureaucrats and elected officials. This model also asserts that workers, consumers, and the public come before the interests of shareholders when conflicts arise and must be resolved. There are some critical issues with the social activism model, however. While a normative ethical framework can be a great, consistent standard for corporations to follow across the board, arriving at such a framework can be problematic. The basis for what counts as good or bad can often not be agreed upon by the proponents of this approach. And even then, standardizing the concept of morality through normative means comes at a cost. It discounts the unique cultural experiences and struggles of various groups. It's basically taking the corners off in order to arrive at a compromise. Furthermore, normativity often requires enforcement, and assigning this to a government body or even an independent watchdog can introduce additional risk. On top of the four models that we looked at, there are yet other notable approaches to CSR that we can explore. Carroll's pyramid is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but made for CSR. In this model, corporate responsibility is viewed across different domains: economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic. We can call this a stopgap between the classical model and the stakeholder model. This approach identifies economic responsibility as the foundation of any CSR effort, from which more layers can be built, but without which no corporate responsibility can take place. It allows for social requirements, expectations, as well as desires. Having said that, Carroll's model prioritizes economic activity as a base need, and only after that's been taken care of can other CSR efforts, such as legality, ethics, and philanthropy, can be considered. This means that, as a business, economic sustainability is still a top priority, and the importance of other areas diminishes the further up you go. In the triple bottom line model, different areas are considered, all on equal footing and all critical to CSR. The focus instead is on the sustainability of the business across three different bottom lines. The corporation is evaluated on the standards of economic, social, and environmental sustainability. The level of a company's achievement of responsibility is determined by sustainability in all three areas. No single bottom line can be sacrificed for another. So if we are to give a corporation a grade, it cannot pass if any one bottom line fails. We have seen different corporations adopt different models for their benefit, from the least involved classical model all the way up to social activism or the ethical group of theories. This is, of course, due to the economic and socio-political environment they're in, as well as internal factors such as corporate resources that can be allocated to CSR. Some of the drivers include the sociocultural concept of the corporation. How does society view the corporation itself? Is it just a business entity that exists to sell goods? Or is it a social citizen with greater responsibilities? Economic maturity and available opportunities are also critical for businesses. This largely determines whether they even have the ability to begin with to consider CSR initiatives. The political will of governments to exercise power over enterprise is an important factor as well. Will they hold corporations accountable to high standard of citizenship, or will they be happy with businesses just existing and providing some economic activity to the public? Government corruption can discourage CSR, but in some cases, encourage its very practice. If oil companies, for example, have the ability to bribe officials to look the other way when environmental violations happen, they will not be incented to act in the best interest of the environment and the people in it. Public confidence in government and corporate institutions is also a key factor. When legitimate CSR efforts are being dismissed by the consumers and the public as fake window dressing initiatives, corporations will not be encouraged to engage in further CSR campaigns. Another thing to think about is how engaged the community is and how much they value sustainability across the three bottom lines. If they are disengaged or ill-informed about important sustainability issues, they cannot exert pressure on corporations to be socially responsible. Finally, the need for philanthropy can encourage or discourage companies to engage in CSR. In a well-regulated society with little income inequality and high availability of social benefits provided by the government, there is little incentive for corporations to undertake philanthropic activities. Thank you for watching my presentation on the theoretical models of CSR. For our discussion, I invite you to think about the following points. First, which of these models do you believe is the most prevalent in modern business? And second, in your opinion, which model is the most appropriate for our society?